we're very lucky to have all these amazing franchisees that we have. Some of the best innovation comes from our franchisees, right? So, we're always open to that. The membership program that we have a phenomenal membership program that the genesis of that membership program came from one of our top franchisees. It wasn't an Altitude idea. It was a franchisee that said, we want to do this.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
All right.
Yeah. I got a question for you.
Okay.
If I told you that you could get like a master's level education in leadership and franchisee operations in 40 minutes, would you say that I'm crazy?
Not at all. My diploma is on the wall. Why do you ask?
Because our conversation with Mike Rotondo from Altitude Trampoline Park and inside indoor active brands, truly is just a treasure trove of insight and wonderful thoughts of what to do in business and how to lead a team and CEO executive level thought process, the franchisee-franchisor relationship. It runs the gamut.
Yeah, there is not 1 second of fluff in this interview. I mean, this was a phenomenal conversation with Mike Rotondo. We learned so much about the Altitude experience, as well as his background as well. He has a wealth of a career history within restaurants, food service, and particularly franchise management. So he spent many years with Tropical Smoothie. He was with Honey Baked Ham, Edible Arrangements, and he's been with Altitude since 2019. So he's been he joined in December of 2019, which of course is a very interesting time to be starting any job with any company, but CEO of a trampoline park company definitely has its unique challenges as far as what came right after December 2019.
Well, and what's interesting is, thinking about that creative and collaborative process that happened, after that in terms of what do we do during the pandemic, but then even growing the brand after that. He talks a lot about brand creep, and being who you are and actually avoiding brand creep. So it's very easy when you're kind of thinking creatively and innovatively to think about all the different things you can do. We could do this, we could do that, we could do this. We've got the space, we've got the money, but does that fulfill our mission? Is that really part of who we are? And, he really talks about how you have to balance your leadership and balance the team so that you don't get too far out of bounds, but you're still being very creative and innovative.
And I'm so glad he mentioned that, because without naming any names, there are many places I have been to that don't have that same mindset. And I've asked myself, why is this here? Why is this part of the experience? Why is X, Y, Z, et cetera? Again, not going to mention any specifics, but he talks about the importance of really knowing your core product and offering and building the experience around that. So not just adding something for the sake of adding it, even if you've got the space and, like you said, the money and the capabilities to do it. He also talks about process, and that being one of the critical components of running a franchise organization. I would broaden that out to say any organization needs process, but needs to balance it with the art as well. And I loved hearing the way that he defined that, the way that he really articulated the importance of that balance and art, but also exemplified that as well through very specific ways that they do that with their frontline team members at Altitude.
He also talked about pickleball. Pickleball.
I think this is the first time on the podcast that we've talked about pickleball. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
We were due to talk about pickleball, and we did today.
Absolutely. Yeah. The growing trend, he talked about pickleball pros, which really hasn't been around so long to think about the fact that people are, dedicating themselves to the activity. But
So is this the Pickleback Pros podcast? Pickleball.
something like that.
Didn't even say that right. Oh, whatever.
That's okay. Yeah, so just thinking about where the activity has kind of evolved, and that there's some people that are very casual with it. Some people really take it seriously, like any kind of recreational sport, I would say, but how that's being incorporated into different brands and where it should be and should not be. So I thought that was really interesting.
And then really tapping into his CEO mindset of pushing for what's possible. And he talks about the difference between, is it realistic or is it possible? And how that helps to foster a culture of innovation and growth. And really exciting to hear everything that he said about it.
Yes, it is. And I think it's now time to jump into this conversation with Mike Rotondo.
Put your graduation cap on.
Hey, Mike, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to jump into this conversation, no pun intended. But Mike, can you give us a quick roundup of your background and kind of how you got into the position you're in?
Yeah. I go way back in food. I mean, my first job was at a Baskin Robbins scooping ice cream, but working with franchisees. Like I've always enjoyed working with franchisees, but I've been with brands, Baskin Robbins, Wendy's, Arby's, Honey Baked Ham. So I've held different leadership roles there on the business development side. And then probably the most time was with Tropical Smoothie Cafe. I was there for 10 years. And led them through some of their early stages of growth and strategy there. So that was a blast at that brand. But probably I think I'd have to say my funnest jobs always were. I grew up in Illinois, and there was a park near my house, and every year this big carnival would come to the park. And my parents would always give me a hard time because I'd be 12, 13, 14 years old. I would always go there when they were setting it up and go around to all the different booths and try and get a job, working at the carnival and getting free tickets and stuff like that. So I guess I go way back in the attraction space, working at that carnival in my hometown there every summer.
That's awesome. Can we would love to now connect that to today, from scooping ice cream at Baskin Robbins and working at the carnival, walking around while they were setting up, asking for a job, and then what then led to your role as CEO of Altitude?
Yeah. So got involved with Altitude. NRD, a private equity firm here in Atlanta, reached out to me, and they had made an investment in Altitude trampoline parks and asked me to come on board and lead it for them. They were at a growth stage there. So this was in 2019. So December of 2019, I joined as the CEO of Altitude and my new venture into family entertainment. And we all know what happened about 4 months later. But that's what brought me here to Altitude. And it was really my background in franchising and branding and development of concepts is what brought me here to Altitude.
And I know, Mike, before we started recording, you said, during the pandemic, you couldn't do, drive-up service and things like that. And I imagine if you figured out how to do a drive-through trampoline park, you'd be.
Hey, we were, we'll get to it when you talk about like what's a key element, like what's something you have to think about as a leader, creativity, right? You got to be super creative. We were brainstorming on like, how do we do this in the parking lot? Like, how do we set up exercise stations, jump rope? Like what are things we could invite people to come do in our parking lot? Like, I mean, we were just thinking of anything, restaurants were trying to figure out how to do curbside pickup. We were trying to figure out how to do parking lot trampoline park, and so it was really a lot, and everybody had to really be on their feet and think quickly on how to navigate those crazy waters.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, for people who may not be familiar with the Altitude experience, can you kind of walk us through what that is?
Yeah, Altitude is it's a family entertainment center we really focus on kids from 3 to 13. That's kind of our sweet spot there. Birthday parties, open jump. We have trampolines. We have some really cool video type games where one is Valo, you jump on a trampoline and the kid shows up actually on the screen and you're playing a video game while you're jumping. So different types of virtual games in the park, but really at its core, altitude's about getting people moving. What you would experience at altitude is, heard it from other people, called free play, right? It's kids out there meeting other kids, playing, creating games, being active, get off the screens and get on the trampolines, and being active in the park. So everything from just coming in as a toddler, jumping on the trampolines, to being at a birthday party, and experiencing the different activities at an altitude. But that's really what we're all about.
Yeah. And with your background in franchising and honey baked ham, and you said tropical smoothie, can you talk about, I would say, what you were doing in those roles that you are now able to now implement that into altitude from a franchising growth standpoint?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the concept of working with franchisees and the relationship between the franchisee and the franchisor. So the support systems that have to be put in place, the training tools that have to be put in place. We partner with a great learning management system called Scoots, we've done some great things with that, and that has really helped us. So I think I've always been kind of the one that wants to put process to things. Operating a location, a lot of times there is a lot of skill and art to it, right? What I've always tried to do at any brand I've ever been at is bring process to that, right? So that it can be replicated, and it can be tracked and it can be taught, as opposed to watch how I do this. And then that's it. And that's the only training, right? Now we're talking about videos and tests that they take. So that I've always thought like that. Any concept I've ever been at, small or large, how can we take the daily operations of this park and really make it as manageable and as teachable and as scalable as we can? So that I think that's one thing. I think the other thing too is the branding side of it, right? Like, when I first got at Altitude, there was a lot of, thinking about attractions, right? Like we started out as a trampoline park. And when I got here, we were putting in ropes courses and ninja courses and trying to really expand that. And I think that's something, again, where my background was, let's really focus on this core category and let's just do that better than anybody else, right? And just because we put in a ropes course to a trampoline park doesn't make us an adventure park now, right? Just making that one change doesn't really change who we are. So really thinking about and trying to get that brand focused and saying, we can't chase, right? We can't chase, like, let's stay with who we are. So I do think that type of stuff from my past, regardless of what brand it was, that focus of be who you are and just be that better than anybody else. And we've made a lot of changes at Altitude that has brought us to that point today.
Mike, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the franchisee-franchisor relationship, right? You said that's a huge part of obviously what you do on a daily basis. Can you talk us through kind of that maybe that franchisee mentality or the thought process of, going from, hey, I think I'd like to do this, to actually being able to do that, and what kind of, learning there is, what kind of relationships they have to have, and those type of things?
Yeah. That's what's great about the franchising industry, right? Because you're still, you're still a small business owner, but you're not alone, right? You've got all of this support around you. So you decide you want to do this. I want to get into this segment. Okay. How are you going to find the right location? Who's going to help you find that location? How are you going to build it out? The relationships that we have with manufacturers and designers to really do the right layout for the park. How am I going to market that park? How am I going to teach all my staff, right? And sometimes people think, oh, so but you just help me get it open. And then once I open it, like, I don't need you anymore. No, it's the ongoing, right? The innovation, the constant leadership, new programs, and so the relationship, I heard it described best one time, where the relationship between a franchisee and a franchisor is, if you think about it, the franchisee is like the heart and the franchisor is the brain. Doesn't mean the franchisor is smarter. It just means that's our function, right? Our function is to create the programs and the processes and the brand and the strategy. The franchisee is the one that's going to pump the blood through the system and make everything really come together and work. Can't have one without the other. They have to function together, right? And so I think what happens is people, they become a franchisee for that reason. They want that leadership. They don't want to have to go try and figure this stuff out. So we literally, you become an Altitude franchisee. We work alongside of you all the way of getting your park open, helping you open your park, and then constantly working with you on a regular basis to be successful in your business. A franchisor cannot be successful if their franchisees are not successful. It just doesn't work. So our focus is our franchisees.
I would love to touch on what you mentioned about process and the importance of processes, and talk about the kind of putting in those systems. And you talk about Skooks and the learning management system and all of that. And even I think about process from a one-man consulting business from that standpoint. And even I find myself leaning towards what you said of, watch how I've done before, and this is how it works, of me even just having those internal conversations with myself. So I think the question really is, why is process so hard? Because from a broad standpoint, it sounds like it should be simple, or it sounds like it should be assumed, but why is it so difficult from an implementation standpoint?
I think, I go back to, somebody showed me this a long time ago. I go back to the change curve, right? And something has to change. Your initial reaction is, no, I'm not going to change, right? That's not going to happen. I don't even believe this, right? So you've got to get yourself through that change curve, right? It's funny, the first time somebody showed that to me, and they're like, well, you've got this change curve, Mike, and initially people are just going to say no, and then they're going to resist it. They're going to deny it. They're going to resist it. But then eventually they get up here. And I was like, great. So we just have to figure out how to get to that end game. And she was like, Mike, you're in denial of the change curve. Like, you're not even accepting the change curve right now. So I think that's where people get stuck, right? Because it's hard. Change is hard. Changing anything is hard. And what I try and tell people is, when you're trying to make a change, recognize where you are in that process, right? Because if you can just get from denial or resistance into, let me investigate this a little bit. Let me try it. Let me test it out. Let me talk to some other people, right? That's how I start to gain a little bit more of a commitment. And then I embrace it, right? That's when the change really takes place. But I think really what happens to all of us is, regardless of what it is, even though we know it has to be different, that change is scary and it's hard. And to put it into context, I think it's a great visual of it. And real quick, I'm a big Starbucks guy, right? I don't know who goes to Starbucks, but I don't know who doesn't go to Starbucks, right? Years ago, I'm an older guy. Years ago, when you went to Starbucks, making an espresso was an art. You ground the espresso, you did all this stuff, right? And they'd set a little timer when they made the espresso. And if it wasn't the right time, they would dump it and everything. Like, it was a real art, 80% art, 20% process. They have completely flipped that. They're just pushing buttons to get the consistency, the speed, to be able to scale it, to be able to have not these specialists working the promotion or the position. So that's where that process and art thing comes in place. But it's all about believing that you have to make this change and then fighting through that change curve to be able to accept that process.
Mike, it's really interesting because I've studied kind of the human condition, and, within that, you talk a lot about grief. And those stages of grief are very similar to what you talked about with change. So I'm guessing there's some sort of correlation there.
There is.
When people are asked to go through change, it's like these stages of grief that they have to go through.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering also if we can dive a little deeper into that art. I don't want to say art versus process, but art
Sure.
and process, because I totally see what you're saying about Starbucks and many other places where they've taken that artisan and they've turned it into something that's more of a process for consistency and probably more for efficiency as well, like as places get busier and busier and busier. So maybe the question is, how do we at least keep some of that artisan process in there? Because that's probably what's going to differentiate you from your competitor.
Right. So use an example of in an altitude a court monitor, right? So there are processes that they have to follow, right? We want them to have those processes so a part of what they do. It's just very natural for them. The art comes in now, how they interact with the jumpers, how they talk to the parents, right? When they're double jumping on a trampoline, right, that they're not supposed to be doing, right? How do they approach that? How do they talk about it? That's the art comes in to me in more of the customer experience, the guest experience. So it's like follow these rules, right? So that you don't have to think so hard about that. Don't work on creating that. That's all process now. Now think about it more. Put your creativity in now how you actually work with the guests, play with the kids, that type of stuff, right? Like I'm a birthday party host, and there are these 5 things I have to do. So if I can have a really great process that helps me do that easier and faster and more efficient, I can spend more time creating an amazing experience at this birthday party. That's where the art comes in, I believe. I believe that's the real payoff.
Yeah. How do you distill that then to that court monitor, to that party host of saying, here's all the things you have to do, and here's all the things you also have to do to meet the standard of the organization, but it is, showcasing the balance, or I'd say the intersection almost between the balance or between the process and the work. Yeah.
I think it's all through really great training and any of these videos we can show them on the job training applications that, I mean, you go to some of these parks and, court monitors, and there's no question why some make this much in tips and some make this much in tips, and why people fight to get that party host job, in a facility. So I think they just kind of rise to the top. It's the right. I mean, some of our franchisees are like, that's the cream of the crop. Like, there people will ask about being a party host. You got to prove yourself. So it's through leadership and it's through training and development of those folks. And some of it is sometimes it's just finding that person, right? When you're going through the interview process, right? Like you have to explain to somebody, we smile here, right? You can smile, right? I mean, we need to move on, but it really comes down to the leadership within the park, the manager and the training, and as much of that you can put into a learning management system is really going to help.
That's awesome. I love how people integrate those two things, like the art and the process, and really put the experience in the team members' hands, right? In terms of how they deliver that. But Mike, I'm also wondering if we can shift gears just for a second and talk more about the indoor active brands concept, right? Because there's a lot of other things under that besides altitude that I think I just learned about when we started this conversation. So if you could kind of walk us through what that means, what that looks like, and how you're moving that forward.
Yeah, Indoor Active Brands is really a new holding company for NRD Capital that was created to say, okay, we've got this great brand Altitude, right? 83 parks strong, a very robust pipeline. Like we've got a great leadership team. What are other things going on in this space, right? And pickleball. Of course, if you don't play pickleball, you probably know somebody that does, right? So it's just going crazy. And we said, man, let's take a look at that. And how can we take all of our expertise and say, what would a pickleball concept look like for indoor active brands? How do we take all this great stuff we know about altitude and family entertainment and bring that over to the pickle pad? So we take pickleball, but it's not just a pickleball gym, right? It's pickleball. There's social games. There's a whole green space. It's all indoors, but there's big, astroturf areas with cornhole and ping pong and foosball and seating and all those fun things you would see kind of in an outdoor space while people are playing pickleball, and also this really great restaurant called Crave Social Eatery. So I could come there on the weekend, get something to eat, watch my friends play pickleball. So it's not just what a lot of other people are doing right now, or they're building like a pickleball gym. And then you have other concepts that are building a pickleball world, right? And it's massive. We're doing this in what we feel is a very reasonable, scalable way that will get people playing pickleball and socializing with this sport. So, one quick example would be if you look at some of the other pickleball concepts and you go to their website and you say, oh, I'm interested in like doing an event or a party. It's like fill out a form, right? So we'll take a page out of Altitude and say their party, yeah, click here, book now, right? Like, so we'll take that part of it and make what our version of this pickleball concept much more user friendly to the consumer. And I think get a lot of people socializing around this pickleball craze with some good food and friends and entertainment.
I'm curious, and this is maybe pulling back a little bit, but just pickleball's overall place in the out-of-home entertainment industry. So when I think of pickleball, when I think of the concept, my initial thought goes towards like bowling or driving rig concepts that have been turned into entertainment. But this really is more closely affiliated with something like Altitude because there's the active component of it as well, which really makes it very different from, say, I'll go to Top Golf, I'll hit some golf balls and have some beers and have some appetizers and with that social experience is there, but I'm not sweating. Versus if I go to either Altitude or playing pickleball, there is the actual almost the athletic component of it. So I'm curious as far as it's almost like it's this fine line between active entertainment and the social entertainment that's similar to those other types of brands.
Yeah. And I think what we're going to see is it's going to vary by like day and time of day. Like those avid pickleball players, they're going to be there, I think, in the mornings, again, when it's not busy. And then at night and on the weekends, it's going to be just social. Right. Like I've been to these concepts, like they're out there, like some people are out there in like jeans and sneakers and hoodies, they volley a couple of times, they're laughing, having fun, and then they go sit down and get something to eat or drink. Right. And so I think you're right. It's like it is different. And it's interesting because the team that's working on it, right, they're King's Bowling, Main Event, Top Golf, Dave and Buster's, like they've got that kind of background. And there's times we'll be talking about stuff and I'll be like, guys, we don't know. Like we need to think about this differently. What worked at a bowling alley or at a Top Golf or something, we need to really keep our eye out here because this is going to be a bit of a different crowd, but we do think like we've designed it to where like, it's very social. So the courts, most of the courts have like a little gazebo next to them with couches. So, if you're just there to watch your friends, get comfortable, get a drink, get something to eat and just kind of hang out, and then there's all these other areas, pool table, ping pong, all the fun stuff you typically see in a social gaming environment. But not a Main Event, not a Dave and Buster's. We're talking the one in Tallahassee is around 27,000 square feet, 6 pickleball courts, 2 big gaming areas, a mezzanine that's got some more gaming up there, and then probably about 2,500 square feet for the restaurant and bar.
So I'm curious, you were talking about thinking differently, right? You're telling your team, you got to think differently. We can't think like all these other brands and all these other concepts. So to me, that brings up the concept of, working collaboratively, but very creatively, right? But then also there's sort of that, don't get too big. You know what I mean? Like almost stay in your lane. You kind of talked about it before, like be who you are. So right. How do you balance that? Like, be creative, blue sky, but be who you are.
Yeah. That's a great question because it's very easy. Like we thought about putting in a couple of like swing suites? Should we put in a couple of golf simulators? Should we do, and as we talk to pickleball folks and we talk to some pickleball pros, they were like, that doesn't go with like that's not, like if it was just a bar or something, if it wasn't this pickleball base, maybe, but no, I don't think that goes. So, but it's very easy to get that kind of brand creep, right? And some folks have done it where it's like, well, we'll put in some mini golf and then we're putt shack. Well, no, just because you put in mini golf doesn't make you putt shack. And if you put in swing suites, you're not top golf, right? It's like kind of, stay in that space, be who you are. So there were definitely revisions of it and hard decisions that need to be made. But I think it's really having a good brand story and then just kind of, I was at Edible Arrangements for a while. So, Edible Arrangements, you get them, you send them, right? And we tried to really make it really, people were like, well, when we're talking about innovation, what are the limitations? I was like, if you can dip it in chocolate and it tastes good, that works for Edible Arrangements, right? And well, so we could have cookies and like dip them in chocolate. We could do this, but we didn't go crazy with it, right? It was like have some type of grounding like that, right? Like, do we want, if this is social, we want this to be social. So what are the games that make it more like that? How does that play up to and even when you get to the restaurant, right? Like the restaurant has a little bit of a healthier feel to it, right? No fryers, no grills, so bowls and salads and, sandwiches and everything. But again, not your traditional like bar food, that you might find at a typical, FEC, like a bowling alley or something like that. So, but yeah, it's just really because, I'm the most dangerous one of, going out and getting crazy, right? Usually they're like, Mike, calm down. We can't do that. But I do think you got to push yourself to see what's out there. And then just kind of do that litmus test on, does that work for the brand? So
it sounds like a huge part of innovation is setting the parameters around it and saying we're not gonna do something for the sake of doing it. That we know that the swing suites and the golf simulator, yes, we got the space for it. It physically makes sense, but demographically and experience wise, it doesn't. Can you share a little more insight into the ways that you were able to foster that culture of innovation and growth within the company? And I think this would even kind of tie back to what you mentioned at the beginning of the interview of moving the trampoline park into the parking lot in the summer of 2020 and how all of that, really ties in together.
yeah, well, first of all, I would say that we're very lucky to have all these amazing franchisees that we have. Some of the best innovation comes from our franchisees. Right. So, we're always open to that. The membership program that we have a phenomenal membership program that the genesis of that membership program came from one of our top franchisees. It wasn't an altitude idea. It was a franchisee that said, we want to do this. Right. And I think, again, it's really challenging the team to say from a cultural standpoint. Right. Like, I guess one example would be, sometimes people have said, well, Mike's never satisfied, right? He's never satisfied. And my response to that is like, first of all, I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's not that I'm not satisfied. It's that I don't want to settle, right? I don't want to settle than anything less than what I think is possible for this brand. And so that fosters a little bit more thinking, right? It's like, I know we've done good here, but have we done enough? So I think that's one example. I think the other thing is also kind of the concept of, I'm not interested if this is realistic, right? What I'm interested in is it possible, right? And so you challenge the team, right? Because they'll say, well, Mike, that's not realistic. Well, that my brain doesn't work like that. What I want to know is it possible? And then if you come back to me and say it's possible, but we'd have to do these 5 things, then we can say, okay, 2 of those 5 things we just can't do. So it is not possible for us to do that right now. So I think it's challenging them to think further and challenging them to really think about what is possible? Well, we don't have the money for that. What if we did? Right? Don't let that be something that stops you, right? And then you vet it, right? And it's kind of like, doesn't matter where it comes from, right? No bad idea, right? And also, best idea wins. Like there were people that were, against the membership program. Oh, it's going to hurt our sales, whatever. Man, we did the spreadsheets, we did everything and looked at it. And I can tell you, parks that have 5, 6, 7,000 members, it has been an absolute game changer for their parks.
Mike, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more about kind of the mindset of a CEO, because what I'm hearing you say is very similar to things that I'm hearing some of my coaching clients talk about, where they say, to your point, the CEO is never satisfied, right? Or he's always pushing us, or he's always getting us to think differently. And I think there's a very big difference between maybe that next level leader who may not think that way yet and your role as a CEO, because to your point, it's not necessarily about the immediate reaction of what's possible, but what could we do to achieve that? And I think that's a great lesson. So how does that develop in someone in terms of going from that, either director level or VP to the CEO who is now the one kind of pushing and challenging?
Yeah. You have to have people. You have to let people do those things. They have to feel it. They have to experience it, right? If I go back to Tropical Smoothie, Eric Jenrich, who was the founder of Tropical Smoothie, and I really got heavily involved in innovation there. And Eric was like, he was a great guy, super smart guy, and I would bring stuff to him, and his comment would be, it doesn't knock my socks off. Like I had to get that, like Eric, I had to knock his socks off, right? But he gave me, he provided that environment, right? That environment that motivated me to try and do more. And as I started getting a couple more wins there, right, and I start getting more confident in that area, I start to realize what's possible, right? When we made a green smoothie, a spinach and kale smoothie, I mean, I can remember telling franchisees we're going to roll out a spinach and kale smoothie, and they're like, "You're crazy. We're not going to sell this thing," right? And it ended up being one of the number one smoothies on the menu. So creating an environment where people feel safe to be able to talk about these things that they think could be possible and kind of throw things out there. I think that's what people need to develop. They have to challenge it, but they have to be in an environment, or we have to try and create an environment where people feel it's okay to do that. And they can challenge leadership and say, I think this is a better idea. So you have to kind of try and foster that. I don't always do a great job at that. It's one of the toughest things. But I heard a quote one time, and they were telling people, like, CEOs, like, I don't want you to think like me. I just want you to think, right? Like that's what I want, right? If I say, man, we really need to look at this offer, it's like, is that really all I'm asking? Or should we be looking at the strategy around it, other offers, right? Like, don't respond to just that one thing that a CEO says. Take a step back and think about it more and go, maybe he's really more talking about this. I need to explore a little bit deeper, right? That's that different level of thinking.
Yeah.
Well, first I will say that I had spinach in my smoothie this morning, and I'm an advocate. I'm a fan of that. I do that regularly. So the other thing too is, and this kind of ties in, with your background with franchising, with Tropical Smoothie, with edible arrangements, with everything, and with Altitude, managing consistency and standards across so many franchisees. And you mentioned Altitude's 83 locations. So curious as far as how you not only develop the standard, but really how you make sure that that's living and breathing in every park every day.
Yeah, we have franchise business leaders. So they're FBLs. So we have a group of folks. We have, an operations leader, training leader, and then we have they're franchise business leaders. So each of them has 25 to 30 locations that they're responsible for. and they weekly, monthly, they're the voice of the support center to these franchisees and managers. They have regular calls with these folks. They're visiting the parks. So we have a really best in class ops team. And what I'm proud of is all of these business leaders, Kennedy and Joe and Alicia, they've all run parks. So these aren't like people that just are, reading the book and saying, I think it's supposed to be. They have run parks. So when they're in a park and a GM says, oh, well, we don't do it that way. They're like, no. Let me show you how you do these springs. Let me show you how you're supposed to set up for a birthday party. So I think the operations and training team really has to be dialed in to that. And so we do that. We also have a third-party mystery shop program. So we do have mystery shoppers that go in the parks and we get that data. And that's great data to have. It's not a gotcha. It's not a hammer. It's just great information. It's like, wow, I don't know why I'm not selling so many memberships. Well, the mystery shopper went in and nobody asked them if they wanted to join a membership, right? So we have some of the answers. Now we have to put a plan together to act on it. And communication, we have webinars, monthly webinars on training, on operations, on marketing, to try and create that consistency out there with the brand. But it really comes down. One of the toughest jobs in the franchising industry is a franchise business leader. The person that's out there with the franchisees, working with them and their teams. I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road.
That's awesome. So many, I think, great lessons in what you just shared there. And you've been talking about a lot of the great things that have happened with Altitude and the brands and some of the things you've done. And I know you said earlier before we started recording that this could be its own podcast, but I'm just going to ask for one favorite failure that you've had over the years.
So anytime anybody asks me that, I go back to this. It was that we had a scratch off program, like a scratch off card program that we were going to do at Tropical to, help bring people in and repeat business. So I was presenting it to the operators, like a group of franchise leaders. And I had done this whole spreadsheet of here's the coupons, here's what we're going to do, and here's what I think the offers should be. And calculated, how much it was really going to kind of cost from a discount standpoint and everything, and had it all ready to go. And I'm presenting it, and they're all excited about this program. They're like, no, we need better offers. Like, everybody should be a winner, and don't just do a cookie. Like, let's do a free smoothie and da-da-da. So they're all getting all worked up, and I'm like, oh, wow, all right. So we modify the program. We do it. I mean, it brought people in the cafes, but there were definitely some franchisees that were like, my phone was ringing like, Mike, like, it's working, but like, I'm giving away more stuff than I'm selling, So I think my lesson there was, as a leader, you're going to get a lot of opinions, and a lot of people are going to try and tell you what they think is best. But, at the end of the day, they're not the ones that necessarily have to deal with all of that throughout the entire system, right? So keep that higher level thought process. And I should have kind of pushed back a little, but I allowed myself to get all caught in, like, you get a toaster and you get a toaster, So, and it kind of ran away with us. But again, maybe it was good because it brought people in, but there was a lot of franchisees that were not happy about that program. So that was always the scratch off card was always kind of the needle in my side.
So Mike, in the few minutes that we have left here in the interview, we'd love to know just about advice for aspiring executives that you would offer.
Yeah, I would say, again, some of the stuff I talked about, like, pushing for what's possible, and show your thinking to your team, right? They don't know what's going on in your head. You have to really explain that to them. Let them understand what success looks like for you. I mean, it's like, the concept of like, well, how do I do better, right? I try and tell people, be a volunteer as opposed to a recruitee, right? Like, we got a lot of stuff going on. Like, how can you jump up and help, right? But as executives, I would say that, again, push for what's possible. Creativity is king. I think the other thing too that some executives get caught up in, and I've done it myself too. Somebody told me a long time ago, don't believe your own PR, right? Like, there may be a lot of great things that are being said about your brand, about you, whatever, right? That's all great, but it's like, that's not for you, right? You have to keep your head down and stay focused and make sure you're constantly pushing and doing everything you can to accelerate your brand through growth, and navigating any waters that you have to right now. But again, and then the last thing I'd say is, if you find that you're, the smartest person in the room, you're in trouble. Like I remember years ago, I'm in a meeting and we're talking about real estate, and I'm not the smartest guy but in this particular meeting, I was the smartest guy in the room when it came to real estate, and I walked out of the room saying, we're in trouble, right? Because I cannot be the smartest guy in the room when it comes to real estate. So don't allow yourself to be in those situations, right? Surround yourself with great people and then do the best you can to get out of their way.
I love that. I love that. I saw a similar quote that said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I like that one too. But Mike, this has been a fascinating conversation, and the time has just flown by. So thank you for your time and your insight. If people wanted to learn more about Altitude or get in touch with you or even Indoor Active Brands, where would you send them?
Yeah, if you go to any of our websites, altitudetrampolineparks.com, thepicklepad.com, Indoor Active Brands, or a super easy one is Mike at ATPHQ, Altitude Trampoline Park HQ. Mike at ATPHQ. Send me an email and we'll talk.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today. Like Matt said, the time flew by here and I learned so much, and this was just fantastic. So we're so thankful to have you on the podcast here today. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.
Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.